Mhm.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Peace and Justice Conversations. I'm Amy Antonucci. Whoops, there we go. I'm Amy Antonucci. I'm a board member with New Hampshire Peace Action, and I'm really glad to welcome you tonight, July 15, 2024. Tonight, we are going to talk about militarizing the U.S. borders with Arnie Alpert. For over 40 years, New Hampshire Peace Action has been educating, mobilizing, and organizing to build a more peaceful and just future for all. In that spirit of respect, I'm going to share screen again. Here we go, so that we can take a moment for a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that I am speaking to you, and New Hampshire Peace Action is doing much of their work on Nidakina, the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land, the waterways, and those people who have been in relationship throughout many generations. Quick reminder on Zoom guidelines. We love it when you keep your video on, although we know not everyone wants to. That's okay too. You will be muted to start with. You can use the chat right away to ask questions, and later on we'll have time when you can do the hand raising and I'll call on folks. Tonight we're really excited to welcome back our friend Arnie Alpert. Since retiring from AFSC, the American Friends Service Committee of New Hampshire, 4 years ago, Arnie has been covering the activist scene as a columnist for indepthnh.org, writing about pacifist history for wagingnonviolence.org, and adding content to his own website, NH Radical History. In May, Arnie traveled to Eagle Pass, Texas, where 15 members of the New Hampshire National Guard have been sent to join Operation Lone Star. He also visited the other side of the Rio Grande, where workers were organizing to demand rights in a foreign-owned assembly plant. Tonight, he's going to share with us some of the things he saw and learned and stories he came across. And then we'll move to Q&A. There's also some other special guests here that Arnie will introduce us to. But first of all, I'm going to pass it to Arnie, and please join me in welcoming him.
Yay. Great. Hi, everybody. Now I'm looking for my share. Oh, here's my share screen thing. I'm going to share a screen and have a bunch of slides so that there's some stuff other than me for you to look at while I'm talking. So let's see if I can make that happen. Looks like this is the one. How's that? Is everybody seeing that? Amy's got her thumbs up. So as Amy said, this is going to be largely a trip report about a trip to Eagle Pass and Piedras Negras. The focus is largely on the role of the New Hampshire National Guard and other National Guard units as part of Texas's Operation Lone Star. But I've also been spending over the last few years a lot of time in Mexico and paying attention to what things look like from the other side of the border. And if we have time, I'd love in the discussion to talk about militarization within Mexico and about issues related to firearms. So anyway, those are all sorts of, part of what's on my mind. I want to mention that a lot of the photos that you'll see in this slideshow are mine, but some of them aren't. So in some cases, I've given credit to others. So that's where we're at. And hopefully we'll have plenty of time for discussion and questions at the end. And I'll be able to stick around after pumpkin time at 8 o'clock if people want to have more conversation about this. So let's see if I can make this thing work here. Come on. I'm trying to figure out how to advance my screen. Oh, there we go. All right. So On February 4th, 2024, New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu and 12 other Republican governors went to Eagle Pass, Texas, where they joined Texas's Governor Greg Abbott for a news conference in Shelby Park. And together, they praised Abbott's Operation Lone Star, the deployment of troops and police to the border to repel what Abbott and others of his administration have been calling an invasion. Well, this got my attention in part because it was Chris Sununu, but also because I've been to Eagle Pass before. And I'm going to say more about that later on. The Republican Governors Association had already issued a statement supporting Abbott's contention that Texas was being invaded and that Texas had a right to self-defense. Now, mass migration surges had overwhelmed enforcement capacity and asylum processing in the area around Eagle Pass and Del Rio up the river. Last year, thousands of migrants, mostly from Venezuela, poured into Eagle Pass, seeking asylum. Many more, mostly from Haiti, poured across the river into Del Rio, up the river from Eagle Pass. So this is a real thing. This is not a minor problem that is getting an overreaction. We might dispute how they're reacting, but clearly something is going on that demands our attention. And this is a global issue. It's not just our border with Mexico where this is being seen. It's being seen all over the world. And I noticed Donna San Antonio is here, and she's been paying attention to what this looks like in Italy with people trying to migrate into Europe from Northern Africa. So I'm hoping that during the discussion time, we can hear a little bit from Donna about that. Operation Lone Star started in March of 2021 when Abbott activated the Texas Military Department, also known as the National Guard, to provide support to the Texas Department of Public Safety, also known as the State Police, after an increase in migration, which he started referring to as an invasion and talking about it as transnational criminal networks along the Texas-Mexico border. A couple months later, he issued an emergency disaster proclamation stating that the surge of people unlawfully crossing the Texas-Mexico border posed an ongoing and imminent threat of disaster. And under that state of emergency, he's been able to do all sorts of stuff that he otherwise would not have been able to do legally. And then he's also been doing stuff that he probably isn't allowed to do legally, but he's doing it anyway. We already, of course, you've heard of the wall. The federal government, going back several administrations, has been gradually trying to build a barrier along the entire United States border from Texas to San Diego. Abbott has been trying to supplement that with his own wall. He's also put, as you can see in the photo on the left here, shipping containers all along the riverbank, topped with concertina wire. And in some cases, he's also put these buoys, which have their own wires attached to them. And the river is being patrolled with these fan boats going up and down, basically trying to scare people. But yet the migrants keep coming. They're trying to get to the United States. Many of them want to apply for asylum and try to say that they have the right to come into the United States because of a well-founded fear of persecution. Now, under our asylum laws, once they set foot on U.S. soil, even if they cross the border unlawfully or cross the border without authorization, they still are supposed to be permitted to apply for asylum. That's what the law says. But that is not an easy thing to happen when the river is lined with wires and border and all these barriers, and there's soldiers with guns and such on the other side of the wire. People keep coming, and hundreds of migrants have drowned crossing the river or gotten seriously or fatally injured when they get caught up in the razor wire. Another thing that happened with this was in early January, the governor actually took state control over Shelby Park, which is the municipal park in Eagle Pass along the Rio Grande. It's a 47-acre expanse. It's where people in the local community for years have gone for picnics, to play golf, to go fishing and boating, and quinceañeras and weddings and all sorts of things that typically have been happening in the park. Abbott not only kicked out the local community, he also kicked out the U.S. Border Patrol, which had been using this as a stage for their own operations in the area. And Abbott has been trying to frame this issue as a conflict between the state's right to defend itself and the Biden administration, which the Republicans charge is supporting open borders. And Shelby Park and Eagle Pass has become not only the headquarters for Operation Lone Star, but it's also become the epicenter or the staging area for political theater. In January, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson came there with 61 Republican members of Congress to appear again with Abbott and talk about the immigrant invasion and the need for action. On February 4th, I've already mentioned that Governor Sununu and 12 other Republican governors joined Governor Abbott there. And actually the same day, a group of far right-wing extremists, some of them armed, some of them Christian nationalists, came through the area on their own little tour, trying to side with the governor and say that they were against this horrible thing that was going on there with migration. Donald Trump showed up in Eagle Pass in Shelby Park on February 27th, the same day that Joe Biden showed up in Brownsville, a little bit further east in Texas, both of them holding rival news conferences talking about what was going on. Now, shortly after Sununu came back from Texas, he asked the Legislative Fiscal Committee to approve a special appropriation of $850,000 so that he could send 15 members of the New Hampshire National Guard to Texas. What he said was, quote, in support of security activities at the southern United States border to protect New Hampshire citizens from harm. Based, he said, on a briefing from Governor Abbott, he said fentanyl is pouring in, human trafficking is occurring unabated, and individuals on the terrorist watch list are coming in unchecked. Now, this was not Chris Sununu's first foray into border politics. You might recall that when he proposed his budget for 2023 and 2024, he included a line item of $1.4 million to create something he called the Northern Border Alliance, which was basically to enhance the ability of New Hampshire law enforcement to patrol our short border with Quebec, where he claimed there was a tremendous amount of unauthorized immigration taking place. This proposal was opposed by groups including AFSC, the ACLU, Rights and Democracy, this actually they were successful in getting the New Hampshire House of Representatives to vote it down. But the Senate, which is in stronger Republican control and has actually been more xenophobic than the House, put it back in the budget. And in the Committee of Conference, when they worked out the details of the budget, the $1.4 million was there, and this Northern Border Alliance has gone into effect. This was also not the first time that members of the New Hampshire National Guard have gone to the border. In October of 2022, a lot of National Guard members were deployed to the border for a full year. The difference, though, was that that mission was in support of the work of the U.S. Border Patrol. This time, the mission was in support of Texas Operation Lone Star, which, the way Abbott has created this and is running it, puts itself at odds with the Border Patrol and leads to this idea that somehow we have a conflict between, or that the big issue is which government, the state or the feds, is supposed to protect our borders from immigrants. The Fiscal Committee approved the request for $850,000 on a party line basis 3 days after he requested it. And in early April, 15 members of the New Hampshire National Guard, all members of the military police, all volunteers, none of whom could speak Spanish, flew off to Texas, where they would be based for 2 months at Camp Alpha in Del Rio, which is the next town up the river from Eagle Pass. Their mission would be to work in this sector between Del Rio and Eagle Pass, where they were. Their mission, according to what I was told by the National Guard, was to prevent, detect, and interdict transnational criminal behavior between ports of entry, stop the smuggling of drugs, weapons, and people into Texas and the United States, and then refer illegal immigrants to the official ports of entries. There's an article today in the Texas Tribune. I forget if it's texastribune.com or texastribune.org. It's an excellent publication. There's actually two good articles in there that they just posted about this. But they say that 18 states, in addition to Texas, have deployed roughly 2,400 troops to the Texas-Mexico border in the last 2 years. So this is a big deal. And you can see on this map, which are the states that are there in yellow, are the ones that have sent troops specifically for Operation Lone Star. All right, let's talk about me for a minute and why I went down there. Also in the spring, while all this other stuff was going on, I learned that a group called Austin Tan Cerca de la Frontera, or Austin So Close to the Border, which is a immigrant and worker solidarity organization, was planning on sending a delegation to Piedras Negras, the city across the river from Eagle Pass, to meet and learn about the work of an organization called the Comité Fronterizo de Obreras, or the Border Worker Committee. Now, I had been down there before, sometimes with Austin Tan Cerca, other times with the American Friends Service Committee, to meet with members of this group, CFO, and I love this group. I'm terribly impressed with them, and I've been wondering, the last time I had been there was in 2006, and I've been eager to find a chance to go back there, and when Austin Tan Cerca said that they were going, I jumped at the chance to join their delegation, and then figured that after the delegation, which was only 3 days long, I could just get dropped off in Eagle Pass and then meet up with the local activists in Eagle Pass and try to observe what members of our National Guard were actually doing down there. So let's talk a little bit about Eagle Pass. Eagle Pass is the county seat in Maverick County. Most of the people who live there, and probably in the whole county, are of Mexican descent. Spanish was the primary language that I heard in most of the stores and restaurants that I went into during the 4 days that I was in Eagle Pass, and I got along okay. There are 3 international bridges, 1 rail and 2 highway, which cross the river from Piedras Negras into Eagle Pass and in the other direction. International trade and traffic is quite active, but it has not brought prosperity to Eagle Pass or Maverick County or to this whole border region. Maverick County is very poor. It ranks 250th out of Texas's 254 counties when it comes to per capita income. Another thing I noticed while I was driving around was all the dollar stores that were there and pawn shops. Eagle Pass has $7 Generals, 2 Dollar Trees, and 4 Family Dollars. It has 1 Starbucks. So for you economists out there, I have a proposal that we create a new index of prosperity, which is the dollar store to Starbucks index. And we could compare different communities based on that. And I bet that that would tell us something. I won't even mention the pawn shops that are there. The area, what I'm told by the people who live there, is what they need is not soldiers. What they need is investment in schools, investment in housing, investment in healthcare, investment in telecommunications infrastructure. Coincidentally, or perhaps not, these are just about exactly the same things that people from AFSC and RAD and GSOP heard when they went up to northern New Hampshire and asked people if they were upset about an invasion of immigrants crossing the border through New Hampshire forest from Quebec. And what they said is, we need these other things. We don't need a bunch of more police officers. Now, as I've mentioned, or as Amy mentioned, the beat of my journalism right now is the activist beat. So I could have covered this story or researched it based on kind of a treetop level of Texas politics and national immigration politics and policy and all. I decided that what I wanted to do was, I just assumed that there had to be some local activists in Eagle Pass who were not happy about what was going on and not happy about Operation Lone Star. And sure enough, I found them. I found a group called the Eagle Pass Border Coalition, and you can look them up on Facebook. You can also look for the Eagle Pass Border Vigil on Facebook and learn about what these groups are doing. It's fascinating. I made contact through their Facebook page with America Garcia Gruel. She grew up in Eagle Pass. She left for a number of years. She actually lived in Fiji, but she came back to Eagle Pass to help take care of her family and her aging parents. And she has become an amazing dynamo activist. And she told me that the Border Coalition started when the wall was built, but initially its concerns were mostly about how the border wall was disrupting the local community. And it was only after they started discovering bodies of drowned people in the river last year that they really started to wake up to what was going on here. And then I would say that also the seizure of Shelby Park by the state has certainly also just aroused a tremendous amount of opposition and resistance within this community of Eagle Pass to what their governor and the state are doing, now with the assistance of all these other states sending soldiers and also sending police into Eagle Pass and along this whole border area. I also met up with a guy named Jesse Fuentes. Jesse used to teach communication, and while he was teaching, he started a kayak and canoe rental business using the dock in Shelby Park as the place where his operation went. And of course, once the park got taken, he couldn't do that anymore. And now that the river has these buoys in it and has these fan boats, it certainly disrupted his business, but it's also terribly disrupted the environment, which is where a lot of his attention is. And Jesse also became a dynamic and active member of the Eagle Pass Border Coalition. So it was kind of cool to hook up with them. The coalition itself is the definition of a grassroots group. I don't think it has a budget. It doesn't have any staff. It doesn't have any legal status. I went to one of their meetings. It was on Jesse's porch, where it was about 100 degrees outside, but at least there was some shade there. One of the things that started up through this was after the first dead body was discovered in the river, they decided to conduct a vigil in the park. But then the next day they found more drowned bodies and decided that they would begin holding vigils on the first Monday of each month. Since I wasn't there on the first Monday, I wasn't able to participate, but I'm glad that they've been doing it. And I've actually put them in touch with the Granite State Organizing Project, which leads a vigil which is held at the ICE office in Manchester on the first Tuesday of every month. And I think that America is actually connected with them to have some conversation. So I think that's a nice little connection that was made. During the Christmas season, when a lot of Mexican Americans cross over the bridges to go visit their families in Mexico, they erected a memorial garden of crosses in Shelby Park with crosses representing the hundreds of people who have died trying to cross the river. This was a dramatic display that they were trying to use to dramatize the situation. The crosses aren't there anymore. They've had to take them down because the state took over the park. They're now stashed at one of the local churches. On February 7th, which was 3 days after Chris Sununu and his buddies were there, and 3 days after their city was visited by right-wing extremist groups, the Eagle Pass Border Coalition sent this letter to Governor Abbott, and I think this sums up things as well as anything that I might say. They said, "It is an affront to us as U.S. taxpayers and as citizens of this great state that you have seized our public park, which is owned by everyone, to support an extreme partisan political agenda that endangers our families. Our beautiful and safe public park has been taken away from us and turned into a military-style staging area, now being used as a backdrop for political theater by you who live over 200 miles away and out-of-state politicians." They said if there's an invasion that's going on in their community, it's an invasion by the military forces. Oh, by the way, they've not gotten a response to their letter as far as I know. Maybe that's not a surprise. One of my favorite things that they're doing is that they have regular events that they call Meet the Locals, because of course, this whole thing, this whole political theater has been a magnet not only for people like Chris Sununu and Donald Trump, but it's also been a magnet for visiting journalists from all over Texas, from all over the United States, and from Europe, and probably from Latin America. People are going to Eagle Pass to try to get the story. And usually what they do is they show up at these staged events with the politicians and stick out their microphones and record what, Abbott says and the people with him, and then they leave again. I actually met a TV crew from San Antonio that was parked right outside the gate of of Shelby Park. And they were, the reporter was there and he did a stand up and he talked about something rather they had heard. And then they packed up their van and went away. Most of the time, they don't really talk to the local people. So the Border Coalition has these meet the locals events in a local restaurant and tries to get the reporters to come and say, hey, let's talk to the local people and find out what people actually think. Once in a while, you can get some people who do that. I recommend the Texas Tribune, which has an article on this topic that was posted today. Now, let's talk a little bit more about what's going on along the border and what this militarization consists of. First, there's the wall, which, again, has been built by the federal government. This thing up in the upper left-hand corner, that's the federal wall. But Abbott has also been trying to build his own wall. So far, he's only got 34 miles out of 1,254 miles of Texas-Mexico border built, and his wall will cost the state $25 million per mile. The Border Patrol, which is the federal force, is pretty much everywhere, I guess, except for Shelby Park. So you'll see these white trucks pretty much anywhere you go throughout this whole region. There's also at least one private prison built by the GEO Corporation, which is used as an immigrant detention center. And GEO actually operates 11 prisons in the state of Texas. So this is probably not just to house immigrants, but also the business of incarceration has increasingly been outsourced in our country. Another development which happened last year was the passage of a law known as SB 4, which would give Texas law enforcement officers the authority to arrest people that they believe are unauthorized immigrants and then have them deported. Now, the federal government says that the state doesn't have the authority to do that, that enforcing immigration law is the responsibility of the federal government, not the states. The implementation or enforcement of SB 4 is being challenged and has been held up by a federal court. That has not stopped Texas National Guardsmen and law enforcement officers from threatening migrants, sometimes from across the river, saying, if you come across, we're going to arrest you under SB 4 and deport you. The federal holdup in court has also not stopped other states from passing copycat legislation, which at least in Iowa, Arizona, and Oklahoma are going forward, and probably in some other states as well. I saw an article about this in an Alabama newspaper, so I believe that Alabama is another place where an SB 4 type thing is going on. In discussion, I can tell you a relevant New Hampshire story back from 2006, if there's time. We've got all those things. You've got thousands of soldiers in the area. They need somewhere to live. There are at least 3 military bases. There's Camp Eagle and Eagle Pass, which is actually, it's now in operation, but it was under construction when I was there. I drove in there with Vicky Martinez, a local photojournalist. We were directed by a construction worker to the main trailer where the manager was. The manager was a very friendly guy. He told me, I introduced myself. He told me his family has a camp up on Moltenboro Neck on Winnipesaukee. We chatted about that. And then he said, by the way, this is a military facility. You're not allowed to be here. You need to leave right away. And Vicky and I were escorted from the property. Anyway, that's what I learned there. But we also drove through Camp Charlie, which is by the county airport. And I never made it to Camp Alpha in Del Rio, but that's where the New Hampshire National Guard members were based. These bases are all built and operated by private contractors. So if you're ever wondering where the 11 or $12 billion that has been spent so far on Operation Lone Star is going, there's part of your answer there. And I assume that there are more military bases all the way to El Paso. Militarization of the border is big business. There's an annual border security expo where the latest hardware is displayed. But I read a part of a market research report on this topic, and this is what it said. It said that the market, this is the global market for border security, is going up year after year after year and is projected to reach nearly $1 trillion by 2031, 7 years from now. The report says that North America dominates the global market and is projected to grow at a rate of 5% during the forecast period. It said, North America is likely to witness an increase in the adoption of products and services related to Homeland Security owing to numerous military modernization and enhancement programs underway in the North American region. This projection does not appear to be based on partisan politics. Todd Miller, writing in the Border Chronicle, says the $28 billion of contracts issued under Biden since 2021 has already outdone Trump, who doled out $21 billion during his 4 years. So this is not about a GOP crackdown versus Democrats favoring open borders. It's not about Republican xenophobia versus a Democratic concern for human rights. It's not about primarily a conflict between state and federal authority over control of the border. I would say it's about how do we respond with compassion and sense to a global crisis brought on by armed violence, by organized crime, by drug addiction, by climate catastrophe, and all of the various causes of poverty and inequality that are forcing people to leave their homes and try to make it to the United States. Since I know some of you are wondering about this, yes, Elbit Systems does have a role in this global border operation. They make towers which are used for surveillance along the border. For those of you from out of state, Elbit is an Israeli corporation that has its US headquarters in Merrimack, New Hampshire. The New Hampshire National Guard, let's talk a little bit about what they actually did and didn't do, and a little bit more about my trip. Before I went, I talked to the public affairs officer for the New Hampshire National Guard. He was very friendly, he was forthcoming, he answered my questions, and he invited me to observe one of their training exercises. I wasn't able to go because I had a date to go up to Dartmouth to cover a rally by the Graduate Student Worker Union, which was about to launch a strike authorization vote among their members. Anyway, I also didn't get to visit the migrant shelter in Eagle Pass, but from what I've heard from people who had been there, was talking to the migrants, the stories are what you've probably heard, that people are leaving their homes wherever they are in Honduras and Venezuela and Mexico and El Salvador because of the desperate conditions that they have faced: violence, extortion, desperate poverty. And on the road, what do they face? Violence, extortion, desperate poverty, theft, kidnapping, and rape. The routes are controlled by cartels. It is just awful. And yet they keep coming and they want to get to the United States. My attempts to observe what the New Hampshire National Guard was doing were unsuccessful. I got an email back from them saying they could not accommodate my request. So how about that? So we'll have to depend on other reports to find out what actually was happening there. Governor Abbott says that Operation Lone Star has led to 500,000 apprehensions of illegal immigrants and more than 43,000 criminal arrests, more than 38,000 felony charges, and seizure of 487 million lethal doses of fentanyl. I don't know if that's true. What I can tell you is that I met a guy outside the gate of Shelby Park named Steve Fisher. He was walking his dog, and he introduced himself as the former head of the Operation Lone Star Public Defender Office in Eagle Pass. And he said, Lone Star has not gotten a single fentanyl case. All Lone Star is doing, he said, is charging people with felonies for human trafficking for driving undocumented immigrants to their work sites. I did interview the head of the statewide Lone Star Defender Office, and she confirmed she wouldn't say that there's been no fentanyl arrests, but she said that there's very few, and that most of the felony charges are people getting pulled over for driving with undocumented immigrants in their cars. There are very few drug cases, and most of the arrests are for criminal trespass, including cases where migrants seeking asylum have been lied to and misdirected onto property where they then get arrested for criminal trespass, sent to jail. If they post a bond to be able to get out of jail, they then get deported. And when they get a court date, because they've been deported, they can't come back and go to court. They forfeit their bond. Presumably, the county government is collecting all that money. So that's also part of this. Most migrants, she said, want to seek asylum. They're not trying to sneak into the country, and they're being lied to by state law enforcement. Steve Fisher said, tell Chris Sununu he's wasting the state's money. So that's not a surprise, I guess. Anne Marie Timmons, who is a reporter at the New Hampshire Bulletin, also interviewed the public affairs officer for the New Hampshire National Guard. She did go to observe their training. She did interview members of the National Guard before they went. She did go down to Eagle Pass and interviewed them while they were down there. And then she interviewed them when she came back. And she wrote a remarkable article in the Bulletin after that, which I recommend you to look up. In it, she quotes Captain Joshua Lyons, the commander of the military police company, talking about how the soldiers encountered these migrants caught up in the razor wire, trying to cross the river, trying desperately to get into the United States to claim asylum. And Captain Lyons said, it's people who are just desperately trying to find a better life somehow. And then when you see a family unit of parents and children and they just walk 1,000 miles to get there, it's difficult. Sometimes it's those experiences that will help you broaden your perspective. Another soldier, Sergeant Connor Decker, according to Anne Marie, he watched several adults with a child trying to make their way over the fence coils of razor wire. And he said, it tested my personal resolve for the safety of that child. That rattled me. That was really tough to look at because of how that could have gone. And he didn't have to imagine how it could have gone because he had seen another person shred their femoral artery trying to clear the fence. Also challenging for him was being unable to assist because their orders prohibited them from actually helping the migrants, including helping children get over the fence safely. We're just the call-out guys, he said. Having to watch is very tough at times. So I have some hope and maybe some faith that at least for these soldiers who saw what was going on can see through some of this propaganda. They've seen the border, they've encountered these migrants, and they're going to remember them as people trying desperately to get a better life for themselves and their families, not as illegal aliens, not as invaders, and not as transnational criminals. And perhaps we'll learn more from them as we go. I want to go to the other side of the river for a moment, and then hopefully we have enough time to continue to have some discussion. One of the things I learned about in Eagle Pass is a new proposal to build a privately owned rail and highway corridor between Piedras Negras and Eagle Pass. The railroad line and highway will go through a poor neighborhood and also go through sensitive floodplain areas. And these are things that the local people are upset about. And it seems like from the local press reports, most people in Eagle Pass are against this, but they have very little power to resist the combined political and economic power of this project's backers. But what it's all about is transporting products that are getting made in maquiladora factories on the Mexican side of the river, in places like Piedras Negras, but all up and down the river. Like the mills of Manchester and Lowell in the mid-19th century, where workers were mostly young women from depressed rural areas, hired because they were considered more exploitable. When these factories started getting built in northern Mexico decades ago, most of the workers were young women. When NAFTA was adopted, and then the factories under what was called the Maquiladora program, if products were assembled there based on components which were manufactured in the United States, brought over the border, reassembled into products, exported back across the border into the United States, they would get lower tariffs. And that would presumably be an advantage. And supposedly this was a development model for Mexico. Well, when NAFTA was adopted in 1994, as you might remember, it basically turned the entire country of Mexico into a maquiladora zone, but still the factories were mostly concentrated along the border, all the way from Reynosa to Tijuana in the west. The workforce at this point is not mostly women, it's women and men, but under NAFTA, it's easier for goods and investment to cross the borders, but it's not easier for workers to cross the border, and it's not easier for migrants. Some of these factories have had unions historically, but the unions were typically allied with the owners. The good news is there are changes taking place. two things I want to mention is that when NAFTA was renegotiated and became the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, there were new provisions in it that allowed Mexican civil society organizations to file protests directly with the US government about labor rights that were being violated in Mexico. And that has been taking place now by this group, the Comité Fronterizo de Obreras. The other thing is that it is now possible under Mexican law for workers to insist on elections and do what on this side of the border we would call decertify corrupt unions and then vote in a union of their own choosing. And that has been going on as well. The CFO was started in 1978 by the American Friends Service Committee. It became an independent Mexican organization in 1986. Its job is to help workers understand what their rights are and help them figure out how to organize. I was there on 3 visits in 2000, 2003, and 2008. And also we arranged for people from there actually to come up to New Hampshire a couple times, which is pretty cool. Austin Tan Cerca is based in Austin. Its name comes from a joke. The joke goes, poor Mexico, so far from God and so close to the United States, or Tan Cerca. And that's where this group gets its name. Josefina Castillo, who started this group, is here with us right now. And I don't know if Juanita Rivera has joined us, but if one or both of you could unmute and say a little bit about the work of Austin Tan Cerca, and then we can talk a little bit more about what's going on with the CFO. Josefina?
Sure. Well, thank you, Arnie, for all your information, which is very good. And I just want to say that Austin Tan Cerca de la Frontera was founded in 1999 by a group of people that were attending a presentation of some maquiladora workers that AFSC organized for their central region. And since then, we heard about the work of the maquiladoras, and we decided to pay a visit back a visit to them. And so we did. This was their presentation was in September of '99, and we went back on October of '99. And since then, we have been organizing 3 to 4 delegations a year, nonstop, except for the during the pandemic. But we have been organizing, and Arnie was in one of our delegations last May, which, as he said, he came back to the area. And we have been going with our partners, the Comité Fronterizo de Obreras, and they organize visits to the industrial parks and to the homes of the workers themselves. So it's really a very unique experience that American people can have, listening directly to the witnesses of maquiladora workers themselves. I will leave it there because I know that Juanita has some presentation prepared, but I would be also open to any questions that you may have afterwards.
Is Juanita here too?
Juanita is here, I think.
Good. Please unmute, Juanita.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Yeah. Well, I think more than a presentation is just a brief explanation of what ATCF is. ATCF, as Arnie said, stands for Austin Tan Cerca de la Frontera. We're a nonprofit that raises awareness about conditions of social and economic injustices, especially as they affect, communities in the border, specifically the communities of Piedras Negras and Ciudad Acuña. A lot of our work centers through supporting community-driven resistance to injustice through transnational solidarity and fair trade. And one of our main values is, as I said, transnational solidarity, grassroots education, coalition building, celebration as resistance, and bottom-up power. So our main activity is sponsoring these delegations. As Josefina said, the main purpose of them is to bring awareness as to what is happening here and just spread the word. Our next delegation is in September. Most of the spots are already taken, so the next one available for people to sign up for would be until next May. But yeah.
Great, excellent. And it's atcf.org?
Yes, I can link the website in the group chat, and you guys can also sign up for our newsletters if you guys want to keep updated with anything with our events and for next year's delegation.
Great, excellent. Thank you, Juanita. Let me just say a little bit about what goes on there. The founder and leader of the CFO is Julia Quinones. Their approach is to master the details of Mexican labor law, including wages and hours, severance pay, health and safety, annual bonuses, the right to organize. They then listen to the workers talk about their working conditions and help them learn about their rights. And then together, they identify paths to change, including forming independent unions, trade process interventions, lawsuits, and other things. One of my early encounters with them was, I was there in 2000 and we went to a worker's home, and I remember going, and there were just a few of us, and we were meeting in the woman's bedroom, and Julia and the worker were sitting on the bed, and the worker is talking about things. Julia has in her hand a book of the Mexican labor law, which is like this thick. And what they would do is they would talk about what was going on, and then Julia would look it up together with them and try to figure out whether the conditions that were being described were legal or illegal. And then based on that, they could then strategize about what they were going to do. There was a recent case that we learned about where a Michigan-based company called VU faced an independent union actually getting organized in their factory in Piedras Negras. So what did they do? They shut the place down and laid off everybody and put the names of the leaders on a blacklist so that they wouldn't get hired in other places. So now Fujikura, which is another company which makes telecom equipment, was employing this blacklist and not refusing to hire people. So the CFO filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Labor, which investigated it, was taking it very seriously. And the U.S. Trade Representative's office got involved. Eventually, they worked out some kind of a deal with Fujikura, which claims, oh, we're not going to do that again, which we don't believe. But at least they've been called to account, and the CFO is continuing to try to figure out what they're going to do in terms of ongoing organizing in that case and so many others along the border. The last thing I want to say about the CFO is that part of their practice always is to build community via popular education, via games, and by eating together. And that is a great formula that we can all learn from. And I hope that some of you get a chance to join one of these delegations, because it is a great experience. So that basically does it for my presentation. I fear that I've taken up most of the hour. You can find my articles about this and other topics at In-Depth NH and Active with the Activists. I repost everything on my blog, which is called Insane Times. Amy mentioned my website, New Hampshire Radical History, and you can find some more interesting stuff there. So I'm going to stop sharing, open things up for discussion. I'd love to get a few words from Donna San Antonio about the European view of migration, if that's possible.
Yeah, thank you so much, Arnie, and it's great to have you here, Juanita and Josefina. And I will unmute Donna in a minute. I just want to remind folks that you can go ahead and put some, some comments and especially questions into the chat now. You can also raise your hand. We will have a wrap up for 8 o'clock, but then Arnie said he will stay longer if anyone hasn't had their question answered, wants more. But for now, let's talk to Donna.
Thank you. But you know what? I think given that we've got about 10 minutes for everyone to be here, let's go directly to questions. I'm not sure exactly where my comments about Italy would fit in at the moment, and people might have questions before they go. So if that's okay, let's hold off on me for a minute.
Good.
Okay. All right. Yeah, sure. Thank you, Donna. Arnie, here's one from Becky. Say more of what we can do from New Hampshire to counteract the inhumane policies at the Texas border from Abbott and Trump.
I would say we're losing the narrative is part of it. And Becky is a great person to be part of that, because Becky has been talking to lots of people who have found their way through the morass of immigration law and made their way to the United States. Now, many people who are migrating haven't been able to get refugee status or asylum status, so their lives are much more precarious. But I think that the stories that we hear from people, why they've had to flee and what they have encountered trying to get here, are stories that can be used to turn the narrative around so that we think of this as a humanitarian issue and try to approach it in terms of justice more than in terms of control and applied violence.
Thanks, Arnie. Okay. David wonders if there's any conscientious objection going on with U.S. troops at the border.
I don't know about that, but there have been a lot of complaints by Texas National Guard members about their pay getting delayed and about their sorry state of their living conditions. So I do know about that. I don't think that I've heard stories of people just refusing to go on these missions. And of course, the New Hampshire Guardsmen who went were all volunteers in this particular case.
Let's see, here we have another one. Can you say something about the funding of the New Hampshire National Guard? Is it federally legal for your National Guard to be joining Abbott's action against the federal government border control patrols control of the border?
I know that Executive Counselor Cindy Warmington asked the Adjutant General some questions about the fact that the National Guard might be going into a situation where they were engaged in activities which were perhaps not legal. I think that she actually may have worked with them behind the scenes to try to make sure that their mission was not going to be involved in any type of apprehensions and such, which is how it did work out. So I'm not sure about that. I think that the New Hampshire National Guard is probably funded largely through the Department of Defense, but I'm sure it also does get some money from the state government. In this case, it was a special appropriation of $850,000, which went $300,000 of it went to the pay and benefits for the troops, and $400,000 of it went to lodging and meals for them while they were in Texas. And then there would have been transportation costs as well. But Texas has spent more than $12 billion on this project already.
Wow. Okay. You had mentioned before most folks got here that there are environmental concerns and that is being addressed or written about. Do you want anything about?
Yeah, an interesting article just appeared in the Eagle Pass Business Journal talking about the part of what they've been doing. They've actually been like destroying islands in the river, putting up, if you remember those photographs, putting up all of these shipping containers and putting these buoys in the river, all of which interrupt the currents and interrupt the flow. But what they're concerned about is that this is an area that has flooded in the past. And of course, with climate change, we've seen the huge rainfall in Houston and not too far away. It's not surprising or would not be surprising for Eagle Pass and this whole area to be hit by major hurricanes. And part of what they've been doing will, in a sense, harm the ability of the river or of the ecosystem to absorb all of this additional water that could come flooding in. And these shipping containers aren't even apparently like actually stuck in the ground. So they could just get picked up and carried away, and who knows where those are going to end up. So there's some serious concerns that are there. There's other impact on wildlife and such. There's actually been some crocodiles spotted in the river, but I'm not quite sure what that's all about.
Interesting. Okay. Let's see. You had mentioned earlier that you had a relevant New Hampshire story when you were talking about SB4. I think you have time to say a little about that.
In 2006, a Mexican immigrant worker was driving through the town of New Ipswich, a little town on the Massachusetts border. He was on his way to work, and he decided he needed to make a cell phone call. So he safely pulled over into the side of the road so that he could safely make a cell phone call. Whereupon he was stopped by a New Ipswich police officer who placed him under arrest and charged him with criminal trespass. Asked him for his papers. He didn't have any. He said, "You are here without authorization. You are under arrest." This seemed a pretty novel and appalling thing, but the chief of police in Hudson said, "What a good idea. and he proceeded to arrest several undocumented immigrants in Hudson a few days later. When these cases finally went to court in Jaffrey District Court, the judge threw them out, said enforcement of immigration is not possible. That's not what the criminal trespass statute is about. If you want to know what the criminal trespass statute is about, ask Amy Antonucci. She can tell you all about it because she knows it inside and out. And this is not what it's for. Anyway, the case got thrown out. The Attorney General at the time, Kelly Ayotte, issued an order to all the police in New Hampshire saying, don't arrest undocumented immigrants for criminal trespass. That's not what the statute is for. Kelly, about whom we can say all sorts of unflattering things, is getting criticized now by her Republican opponent, Chuck Morse, for having made that move back in 2006. Anyway, that's my little story there. But two things that happened as a result of that. One was that the xenophobe lobby really got organized with legislators from Hudson and started introducing a raft of anti-immigrant legislation all the way from then until now. Most of that has been defeated due to organizing, which also geared up during that period of time because people who were defenders of immigrants and advocates for immigrant rights, we got our act together at that time and started becoming much more effective. And you can talk to somebody like Ava Castillo or Lily Mesa about how their own activism really got a boost through the organizing at that time.
Thanks, Arnie. I do have a couple more questions. Let's wrap up the official part of the program here, though, because we are very close to 8. Hour goes by fast. So I'm gonna give you all some information. First of all, just thank you for coming, for spending this hot evening here, hopefully in front of fans or probably AC for a lot of you. We want you to stay in touch with us. nhpsection.org is our website. We are also on Facebook, and you can, we have a calendar so you can learn what we're working on and what programming we have coming up. Here's a little taste. I'll start with in-person. If you're in New Hampshire, we have upcoming Ceasefire Now vigils for peace, and they happen twice a week. Wednesdays in Dover, Thursdays in Concord. This Wednesday, July 17th, 2 to 3 p.m. The vigil will be at Chris Pappas's Dover office, 660 Central Ave. The day after that, Thursday, July 18th, noon to 1, City Plaza, Concord. And then the week after, the Wednesday vigil, July 24, 2 to 3, moves to Senator Shaheen's office, 340 Central Ave in Dover. We go back and forth. And back to online, our next online Peace and Justice conversation will be in 2 weeks, Monday, July 29, 7 p.m. Eastern on Zoom. And we're going to welcome Joel Berman and Dan Messina from Braver Angels, a group addressing growing partisan animosity in the U.S. Also, put on your calendar, 2 weeks after that, August 12, 7 to 8, also on Zoom. We are going to hear about Israel-Palestine Joint Peace Initiatives from the founder of American Friends of Combatants for Peace and the executive director of the American Friends of the Parents Circle Bereaved Families for Peace. This series is free and open to everyone. That said, we really appreciate it when you can put something into the hat. There's a electronic way to do it these days. Your donations are what keep us going, and also your, votes of confidence by giving us even a little are really, really nice for us. So as we said, we're not going to shut it down quite yet. So you can hang in if you want to talk more, maybe hear from Donna, but we're going to end the official recorded part